Hello, arty peoples! Thank you guys so much for your patience. We were having slight technical difficulties, but we are officially live! So, welcome to Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein. I am your host this evening. Welcome to today's class, which is JL 225. So, if you are interested in anything I am going over throughout this class, go to the website jerrysartorama.com and type in the class code JL225. And the teacher's cart should come up with everything I am using. And if we pop in anything else throughout the show, I'll make sure to add that into the cart after I'm done with the show. But before we officially jump into that, just a quick couple of reminders. Our 10th annual self-portrait contest is happening, so make sure you guys get painting and check that out on the website. My moderators, Amanda and Frida, are going to be popping the links into the chat for you guys to just click and follow through. And also, if you guys have been following along the saga of Canvas that has been happening, that was supposed to be today, but we just, due to unforeseen scheduling circumstances, we had to push that off 1 week. So the Canvas Palooza and going over Canvas panels is going to happen still. It's just going to happen next week. So today, what am I doing today? Today I am going to be showing you how to paint clouds, light fluffy clouds. And we are going to be using acrylics, and I just wanted to go over some really fun acrylic basic techniques for you guys, especially for those of you who are starting off or haven't ever touched acrylics and don't really know how to dive in. So I figured clouds would be a really fun subject because it's a very organic shape. It can be really in any shape. It's clouds. It can look like a cheeseburger if you want to. It's fantastic. But let's go over quickly what I am using for today's class so that I can show you how to do it. First and foremost, I am using the Kaleidoscope artist set. This has 30 tubes of acrylics in there. Let me open it up because this is actually the one I'm going to be using. So, oh geez, lid problems. Here we go, 30 colors. And this is not like a high-end professional, crazy, awesome, expensive set. This is a really affordable set. So for those of you who are not familiar with acrylics and want to, dip your toe in the water, so to speak, this is a really great value of a set for you to, test out. Now, the one thing to know with these, because I have all of them swatched out. So this is every color in that set swatched out. And you can specifically see the colors that are actually in the tubes, which is amazing variety. There are so many colors, 30 colors. But the thing to notice with them is this black line that is going through the actual swatches. What that means is, because when I do my swatches, I actually put that black line down first, and when I do the top part here, this is straight from the tube. So that is going to show you whether or not these colors are transparent. A lot of the colors in this set, they are going to have that transparency. So when you go to layer them, they're going to get that optical mixing. So if you layer a blue on top of a red, it's probably going to appear a little purple because when those two colors mix, that's what happens. But just be aware that that's kind of how these colors work. And if you want a more opaque acrylic, there are a good variety out there. But I just wanted to show you specifically, because not all of them are transparent. You have a couple here that do have that opacity. But that's just something that when you do get brand new acrylics or a different set, you should always test them out, swatch them out, see what they're going to do, so you can understand how your colors are going to work on your canvas. Now, besides that, I figured I'd be working in a really fun canvas format. I've actually been doing a lot of this shape of paintings lately. For the Open Studio, I did kind of a very similar one. It was just huge for my teacups. It's actually still sitting over there. And then I have a couple other paintings I've been working on this in this particular shape where it's the tall and skinny. So I've been doing that a lot lately. I don't know why, but this is the Centurion Universal Primed Linen. And it is a panel, so it's not a stretched canvas. It's real thin. They come in a pack of 3, and this is the 10 by 20 inch. So it is already primed with a universal primer, which means it will accept the acrylics or oils, whatever your preference of media is. It's not suited for watercolors, in case you were wondering, nor gouache, if that's what you're looking for either. This is definitely more of an acrylic or an oil painting surface. But that's the size of the panel that I'm going to be working on. Now, I also have, do we have a question?
I do.
Real quick.
I missed when you were talking about the swatches because I was playing catch up.
Yeah.
Suzanne would like for you to remind them what the different layers of the swatches are.
That is an amazing question. Thank you, Suzanne. I always forget to go over them. Whenever you look at swatches that I usually do on this show, this is usually what you're going to see. So you have the black line down the middle. That is a solid black line that does not move whenever I paint whatever it is on top of it. So the very top is usually what's called the mass tone. That's straight from the tube. I don't mix anything into it. And I try to get it as evenly coated as possible, a nice coating, just so I can see whether or not it's going to have an opacity to it or that transparency, you know, because like I said, some of them are more opaque than others. Like the white is definitely more opaque than this yellow. And that's just what that black line does. Now the middle is all of the paint mixed with a glaze. And I actually believe I used the golden satin glazing liquid. I can say words. Glazing. We're in the South, guys. Glazing. What this does is it actually thins out your paint without breaking down that acrylic bond. So it's going to give you a really thin, transparent layer no matter how the opacity is for the rest of the actual paint. So even if it's really opaque at the top, it's going to be nice and transparent. What that does is it shows you those undertones. And by undertones, let me see if I can find one that's actually really, really good to see. Here. The greens are usually where you can really see it. Where you can see the top, the mass tone is really dark, like right here. That, let me actually, I also have them Velcroed to this so I can always pull them off. All right, so you can see the mass tone here. And this is where you get the glazing liquid in. So it's nice and thin. And you can see that this is really, really dark. So that yellow undertone, I can't really quite tell if it's going to lean towards blue or yellow, but by doing that glazing, I can really see that it leans towards the yellows. And then down at the very, very bottom, this is where I actually mix it in with white, just because I want to see kind of the tints of what it would do once I mix it in with white. Again, just another way of kind of seeing what your paints are going to do. We have another question?
Is it titanium white or zinc white or any other white?
That is a fantastic question, Frida. It is a titanium white. The reason why I use titanium white is because titanium white is an opaque white. Zinc white is fabulous white, but it has that transparency to it. So that's why whenever I do mix this in with my colors, I always use titanium white. So, are we good on the swatches?
One last question.
Yeah, go for it.
The ultra mini canvases.
These are the mini canvases. They are 2x3. Love them. And this is, by the way, the Pro Foam. So I actually just take the mini canvases. I cut off the box at the top so I can have them labeled. Tell me you're not OCD without telling me you're OCD. Yeah, I did the little mini canvases and I Velcroed them on. The reason why is because when I do shows like this, I don't want to have to redo my swatches over and over and over again, so I have them ready for you guys. Plus, you know, if I ever have anybody in this studio, they can always see the colors. But, so we got the paints, and the canvas. I'm also going to be, what do we put our paints on? My favorite, which is, let me flip it open. This is the Soho, it's upside down. Soho gray toned palette paper pad. I actually can't believe I said that out loud without stumbling through it. Essentially, it's just a disposable palette paper. It has a nice gray mid-tone. It does have a bit of a shininess to it, so I'm trying not to have the glares reflect to that. But the reason why I prefer the gray to the white is because when you are mixing colors specifically to put on a canvas, especially when you have it on like a gray palette paper and then you go to put it on a white canvas, there's a slight color shift just because of what is around your color. So if you're mixing a really bright yellow on this gray tone, it's going to appear nice and bright yellow, but when I put it on this white canvas, it doesn't look as bright. But that's because this is a nice gray mid-tone. So this is gonna work really well for me to mix my colors and really see the values of them. Now I also have this cloud picture. I believe, and I'm sorry, I actually usually do this, but I did not actually pull the information of where I got this. It's either, I believe it's on unsplash.com, which is where I got this from. I usually go to unsplash.com or pixabay.com. Those are my two that I usually go to for royalty-free images. The reason why I use those two websites is because when I make paintings and I use a photo to reference, it's always important to use a royalty-free image because they have now given me permission to use that image creatively, and I will not have anybody coming after me, being like, you're using my art to make art. And that's where it usually kind of gets to you. So if you're ever making art to sell or anything like that, use one of those royalty-free, even if you Google royalty-free images, that's a really fun way of getting those images and a lot of different types of photos. Like not only, clouds, you got food, you got portraits, you got architecture, you got landscapes, all of it. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to get creative, but not quite sure what you want to paint. So that is for the most part what I'm going to be using. The other things I am using, like I had showed you, the satin glazing liquid. I also have the Creative Inspirations acrylic medium. So I have the matte and the gloss. They're essentially the exact same thing. One just has a glossy finish, the other one has a matte finish. You can, if you want to, mix them together to make a satin finish, which is my personal preference. But the Creative Inspirations, they typically dry just like a normal acrylic would. Then I also have the golden, and this one is a satin finish, but it specifically slows down your drying time. So this will keep your drying time the same, this one will slow it down. And that will come into play when I show you the different techniques of how we're gonna paint these. So, we good on all the materials so far? Oh, sorry, brushes. We need a variety of brushes. I actually got these are all the Mimic Squirrel brushes, so they are all the same kind of bristle, and which is a really nice, soft, really soft brushes, but they absorb quite well, and they are, wow, my brain just stopped working. Apologize for that. They have a nice snap to them. That's what I was trying to think of, sorry. They have a good, like, snap back, so whenever I'm painting, they're not gonna just like stay bent. They will actually snap back into their normal form, which is my personal preference. If you like the other ones that kind of keep their shape as you drag it along, you can use those too, it's okay. There's no wrong answer when it comes to using your own personal preference of brushes. But I did do these as a little bit of a tester for you guys to see. And actually, let me pull this down because we're gonna need to get painting. All right, so let me pull this over. So you guys can see, these are the painting panels that I ended up doing here. And I did these, let me move this out of the way. I did these both differently. I know they're both clouds and they both have two different color backgrounds, and they're both kind of using the same colors because, again, I used the same paint set to make them, but the way that I actually started each painting I approached differently, and I wanted to show you the two different ways that you can go about kind of painting specifically the sky. But this, the way that I'm going to be showing you can be applied to a multitude of other paintings, whether or not you're painting a background for a landscape or portraiture, whatever it may be. Hopefully the things that I'm going to show you are going to be prevalent for all of those. So I got my panel here. Let me actually put this down. Actually, let me put my palette over here so you guys can actually see what I'm mixing. And then I'll have my little photo reference down here. Right? Okay, so what we're gonna do is we are gonna start off, because if you look at our reference photo here, the way that skies typically work is that it's usually darker up here and gets lighter as you get to the horizon. Now you can't see where the actual horizon line is, which is where the sky meets the earth, but typically speaking, as you get closer to the horizon, the sky lightens up. Now that is not always the case, just 100% all the time, just because the sky changes and, you know, sunsets happen and things shift quite quickly with the sky. But 9 times out of 10, what you're going to see is it's darker at the top and it's going to get lighter down here. Now, to get that gradient, that shift from dark to light, is the first thing we want to work on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a couple paints here, and I'm going to actually use the phthalo blue, the cerulean blue, and sky blue. Now, so you guys can see what I'm doing here. This is my phthalo, and the reason why I'm picking this one is because right here, you see that mass tone up top? This is straight from the tube, and it is nice and dark. That's what's going to give me that dark tone. It also, if I look at the undertones here, kind of is more towards like, I want to say like a green kind of a tone. It doesn't lean towards like the purples like this one does. It leans the other direction. So this is the right kind of blue for what I'm looking at over here, because this clearly would be too purple. So same thing here. This cobalt blue would be far too purple. I can put it in there if I wanted to, absolutely. But I'm going to stick with these colors right here, and then here's the sky blue. So it's nice and light, which is going to be the ones that I pull down here. Now I'm also going to be crazy, and I'm going to toss in a little bit of this yellow ochre. Just a touch at the bottom. So let's get our paints all set up here. I'm going to pop them out on the canvas. Here's that phthalo blue. And because my canvas is so large, I'm going to put quite a bit of them on there. And every time I do a painting, by the way, if I'm working on one painting and I know I'm going to finish it before I, move on to the next, I always pop the colors that I'm using upside down in my tray, just because I know I've used that color in my painting. So if I'm looking for it again later on, it doesn't take me a very long time to figure it out. Especially when you're using acrylics, They dry quickly, so you want to move fast. All right, here is the cerulean blue. It's a fun word to say, cerulean. And then my sky blue. And while I am popping these out, if we do have any questions, if you guys want to
will this
let me know.
technique be the same for oils?
Yes and no. Acrylics and oils work a little differently. I probably, because I'm going to show you 2 different techniques. This particular technique that I'm doing here with the background first is probably not the way that I would approach the oils. The second technique that I'm going to show you is probably more geared towards the way that I would do it, if that makes any sense. Although you can kind of, let me show you, and then that might explain it a little bit better. I also have, and it's probably going to be underneath the little picture of me that's on the screen here, I have just a bucket of water here, and I'm going to just keep it up top there, just out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to have my 2-inch wash brush, and the reason why I'm using a 2-inch wash brush is because I want to get big strokes. I want to get a lot of paint on my canvas, and I want the whole thing to be covered first step. I would not use a tiny little brush like this. I'd be sitting here for hours, and we don't have that kind of time, and plus that would dry and it would be very frustrating for you to use. So think of your brushes like tools, like different tools in your tool bag. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a nail, or a screw in a screw. You would use a screwdriver, right? So different tools to different jobs. Same thing with your brushes, right? Big one covers a lot of surface area. That's what I want. So I got a little bit of water on there, and also I do have my easy wiper rags just to kind of get a little bit of that dampness off. I don't want it dripping wet. I just need it just damp, just to kind of get my paints moving around, right? And this is the part where you don't have to freak out about it. You just want to kind of get paint on your surface, and if it's not perfect, don't worry. The cool thing about acrylics is that you can go back over them. and you can paint on top of them. And you can paint on top of them pretty quickly. Now, if you're using oils, you can actually shift the color of your oils very easily, depending on, of course, kind of the colors that you're using. But for the most part, you can shift them around, or you can even wipe it back out with a rag or tools like that. All right, so I'm just trying to get the surface covered, kind of keep it even. Now you will notice that once I get a lot of the paint kind of spread out and around, I'm going from end to end. And I'm not scrubbing it, I'm letting the brush do the work. I'm just kind of blending it out, right? And then I'm going to take a little bit more, and I'm going to dab that kind of around. And then I'm going to take my next color, and I'm going to dab that around, right? Now when I do the same thing, it's going to start mixing them on my canvas. Remember, you want to get all of the little white bits of your primed canvas covered. You really just want to make sure that it's all painted. So again, even if you are not super happy with your gradient, if it's not quite even or perfect, you can always come back and do a second coat. But it's a painting. I don't want this to look airbrushed. I want it to look like a painting. So I want brush marks, and I want it to not be super duper perfect, you know? I want it to look like it's a handmade item. So now when you do gradients like this, you do want to make sure that your gradient, like you can see here, how it goes from dark blue to light blue pretty quickly. I don't really like that. I can change that. Especially because right now I know it's still wet and I can still shift it around. But I want to make sure that that gradient does more of like this, where it's a slow transition. But I'm not actually worried that I have that lighter blue on my brush here. If I go up this darker blue area slowly, it will actually mix in and that darker blue will take over. Do we have any questions so far while I'm slowly doing my gradient? All right, now I think I'm gonna need a little bit more of this dark blue. And if I need a little bit of water, that also helps me blend just a little bit. You don't wanna go too crazy with adding water to your acrylics though. But as you can just see, where I had my paintbrush come down and hit the canvas, it's gonna leave that little like line where I started the brush. That's why you really wanna go from end to end like that. All right. So let's get a good amount of this light blue on our brush. Remember, I just had that dark blue on my brush. That's why I did this. I wanted to really make sure that that light blue is saturating my brush, right? And again, remember, I'm also gonna put clouds on top of this, so if my gradient isn't perfect, most likely it's gonna have a cloud on top of it. I can always put another cloud there if I don't like that spot. That's the cool thing about clouds, is that you can add them in or take them out wherever you want them to be.
Question.
Yes.
Do you use any medium or water to thin the paint?
Like I just said, you don't really want to go crazy on adding water. The reason why is because if you add too much water to your acrylics, you are weakening the bond of the acrylics. And what I mean by that is that think of it like glue. If you were to take, and actually, sorry, I'm gonna actually add in, excuse the reach, a little bit of this titanium white, because I want it to get a little bit lighter down here at the bottom. But if you were to add water to a glue, you'd be making a very weak glue, right? So the acrylic binder in acrylics acts like a glue. It's what keeps those colors glued to your canvas. So if you're watering it down with a bunch of water, you're making it a very, very weak bond. And that's when you have issues with it pulling up and kind of not adhering to the surface properly. That's why, typically speaking, there's like a 30% water to acrylics, kind of a combo. You don't really want to exceed more than 30% of water. You can add water, and it's not going to hurt your canvas too much, you know, if you add just a little bit. But if you really want to make it watered down, and here's this yellow, by the way. So it's just a little bit green, but I do want to keep it nice and light. Kind of reminds me of the beach now. Just a little on the bottom here. If you really want to thin down your acrylics and get a really fun wash kind of effect, that's why I have those mediums on my table here. I'm going to show you kind of how to use those in the second technique, right? So let me put this a little further down. Oh, too far down. You guys can see that. Haha! There you go. So there's my gradient. It goes from really dark blue to a really light blue, and then I even touched in a little bit of that yellow ochre just for a slight difference here, almost looking like a little bit of like a haze coming in from the bottom. Now, with this particular technique, I would let this dry fully before moving on to the next one, the next step. But while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm going to show you how to approach it differently, because this right here, I kind of want to move this around. Maybe that's going to be easier. All right, so this other technique is going to utilize only one color. And do we have a question? Okay, what's up?
Alan is wondering if you can use a spray bottle to keep your paint wet on the palette.
Yeah.
Palette pad.
You absolutely can.
And then Sherry is wondering your preference on heavy acrylics or more fluid types.
First, yes, you can absolutely use a spritzer bottle to keep your acrylics wet. Again, very light on the spritzer. You don't need to add a ton. You don't need it sopping wet just to keep it wet on your palette. But as far as heavy or fluid body acrylics, or even like that run-of-the-mill, these right here are kind of right in the middle. They're not super heavy, they're not fluid, they're kind of right in the middle. They don't really like to retain a whole lot of structure, but they will kind of retain a little bit of texture. I don't have a preference. I guess the issue being is that my style of painting varies so greatly, and it very much depends on what I'm trying to achieve with whatever it is that I'm painting. So if I'm going for a more illustrative look, I will go with more fluid acrylics. If I'm going for something that I want it to actually physically pop off the canvas, I like that textural kind of a thing. And I just kind of teeter back and forth between them. I'm very much all over the place when it comes to what I do with my art, which is what makes me great for my job. I do a little bit of everything. So as far as personal preference, I don't really have one. But I already have blue paint all over my hands. All right, so this one, I'm going to actually use the satin glazing liquid here. And the reason why, you will understand once I actually start doing this. All right, so I do want to just quickly wash this brush off because I do need the big brush, you know? And even if it does have a little bit of blue in there, I'm not going to be too upset. I'd be more upset if we didn't get to the actual painting of the clouds portion of this. So what I want to do is I want to make a very nice fluid. So I got a little paint booger here on the top. Hopefully that won't come off. I want to make a very fluid wash with my acrylics here. And I'm going to actually use, probably should be using a palette knife to mix these. It'll be a little bit better if you do. Now, do we have a question while I'm doing the mixing?
We do. Tracy on YouTube would like to know, are these considered a soft body paint or would you consider these a heavy body?
Soft body. I would consider these a soft body because they are not very heavy body. They're not meant to retain that texture, but they definitely have a little oomph to them, you know?
Hey, what color is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is burnt sienna. I don't know why I'm showing the front camera. Burnt sienna, and this is that satin glazing liquid just mixed in.
Did you say how long that first one's going to take about to dry?
It's acrylics, so no more than 30 minutes until it's like really, really dry, and that's if I'm laying it on nice and thick. I didn't lay it on very thick at all. But this one, because I mixed in the satin glazing liquid, this one is going to take a lot longer to dry because it has that slow dry binder mixed in. Ooh, and I'm gonna need far more than what I put on there. That's okay. So I am going to, for this one, very messily cover the whole panel with just burnt sienna. That's it. And this is the technique where I would use, this is kind of more what I would do for oil painting, because it's more of a traditional method of painting, I guess, more or less. Especially when you're using a slow drying material. All right. Now I am working a lot faster than I normally would, just because I want to make sure that we get to the cloud part of this. But I would normally, I wouldn't honestly leave this very clean. It wouldn't be very precise or like nicely, there wouldn't be that much of a difference between like the sloppiness, but I probably would make sure that's a little bit more even, which is okay. I guess sloppy isn't the right word, it's painterly. Textural. I like it. It's intentionally sloppy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I have my whole canvas covered in that burnt sienna, and I'm going to take my easy wiper, and I'm going to easily wipe off where my clouds go, because this has that slow dry material mixed into it, the satin glazing liquid. Let me try to make sure that this is really on camera so you guys can see, right? So I'm going to say it's probably about right here. And I'm not going to be perfect with this because it's a cloud. If it doesn't look exactly like the photo, it's okay. No one's going to know. How would they know? What are you giggling about over there?
You said no one's going to know, and Katie and I both said, how would they know?
See, this is why we're a good team. I love it. All right. Now notice I'm only going in where there's light hitting the cloud. So cloud is a funny kind of a thing. It's water vapor, so you would think that it would be completely transparent because it's water, but the fact of the matter is that because it's all the water vapor kind of coming together and however clouds form and all that sciencey stuff, I'm not a scientist, but I do love me some science, but you gotta kind of treat it like an in-between a fluffy, foggy object and a solid object. So when it comes to clouds, you really want to have a varying degree of hard edges and soft edges. So some of them are going to be soft and fluffy. Some of them are going to be really hard edges. Now we have a question?
Just an observation. This is how I make clouds in watercolor too.
This is how you make, oh, and this is what you kind of have to watch out. There's a bit of a glare, sorry. as you can see, but when I get the glare off, this is where my rag is touching the surface. That's okay, I'm not worried about it. But yeah, Amanda just said this is how she does clouds and watercolors, which is super fun. All right. Now I am rotating my Easy Wiper just to get kind of a nice clean surface area. Ooh, geez, and I'm dropping it on my painting. Just because I want to make sure that whenever I do that wipe off the canvas, I want to make sure that I have nothing really left on here, because then I'll get a nice clean wipe. If you have that extra paint on your rag as you're wiping it off, it might not be fully wiped off, which would be useful if that's exactly what you intended. All right. Now, the more this dries, the more this is going to be difficult for me to wipe off. So I do want to kind of work pretty quickly, but there are pros and cons to using this particular method, especially in acrylics. Because acrylics can be opaque, you can absolutely erase everything you just did if you go over this with the wrong stuff. And by the wrong stuff, I mean specifically colors that are going to have that opacity to them. So if you are trying to keep the structure that you just kind of wiped out, because once I actually wipe out all of this, and actually, here, let me take a little bit of this before I forget. Just clean up that edge, just so I know that was an oopsie. Because oopsies happen and it's okay. We can fix it. But once I get my clouds kind of placed on here, I would let this fully cure as well. And then once I'm done with that, I would probably approach it in the same manner, especially the clouds portion of it, in the same manner as the blue canvas. So I'm not going to paint both of these fully to the end result. I will finish with the blue canvas. But the issue of this versus just doing the whole background first is that now when I want to do that gradient all the way down, I'm going to have a problem getting that really beautiful transition because it will cover up my clouds. I probably would want to take my brush and carve around all those little shapes that I just made. I wouldn't want to cover it up. So this technique works really great if you don't try to do a perfect transition of a gradient in the background. Or if you do a gradient, have it just really small at the bottom, keep most of this section all the same blue, and then start that transition of the gradient maybe here up, just so you don't have much of the shapes to kind of carve around, or you could have an issue with that. Now, if you do this and you want to try that gradient technique, I would say you still want to carve around your clouds, but you probably would want to do that blue in the background before you start getting the clouds, because the layer, you want to go from the background to the foreground. Do you have a question?
Yes, the rag you're using, you have put the golden satin glaze on it before you're wiping away the
No,
burn.
this is just a dry rag.
It's just a dry rag.
Just a dry rag. The reason why I have that satin glazing liquid, I mixed this in with my burnt sienna. So that right there has all of the satin glazing liquid already applied to this. The reason why I use specifically this one and not this one, because this would give me that nice thin wash, but this still dries really fast. This is a slow drying extender. It's going to be wet for quite a long time. You have a question?
Why did you use brown instead of blues?
Why did I use brown instead of blues? I specifically used burnt sienna, not just any brown, burnt sienna, because, and this is actually what's funny is it's prevalent in a lot of the old masters paintings. The reason why that they usually start off their paintings with burnt sienna is because that was their cheapest paint. because it was the one that if they used a lot of it, it wasn't going to be really hard to kind of get back into their arsenal of paints. That's specifically why that's in a lot of the Old Masters techniques. Why I use it is because I got into that habit specifically because of Old Master artwork. And then I kind of just fell in love with the color. Specifically for the sky, I started off with the burnt sienna because I love that orangey tone to it. That orangey tone next to that blue, you can kind of see it here on the palette. They just look really pretty next to each other. So this color, whatever you put on your background, is going to show through the rest of your painting. So this orangey tone is actually how I started off this painting right here. If you actually see it here, let me actually pull it up a little closer here. Right here, right here, right here, right here. That's the burnt sienna shining through. I didn't really paint over top of it. So that's why I kind of left it a little here and there, because clouds, mind you, this is another part of the lesson, they're not gray. Clouds are not gray. Do not use white and black to make clouds. Those are sad, gray, sad clouds. Clouds are colors, lots of colors. So there is the burnt sienna, by the way, before I get to anything else and forget what I'm doing. There is the burnt sienna panel. I am not going to be able to finish this because it's not going to be dry in time for us to finish it up with the show, but I would let this fully cure. I would paint that blue background in, and then I'd attack the clouds the same way that I'm going to do for my next, the blue gradient panel, which I honestly don't think is even dry, and I thought of this beforehand, and I got an extra one, just in case. So, the one that I actually just did, it's still wet in a couple spots. Here, I can actually show you. So it's still wet in just a couple spots, and when you are actually looking at it, I don't know, there you go. You guys can see that gloss, that shine. Anywhere where it's super shiny, that is still wet. So there are some dry spots, but it's not 100% cured, and I just want to keep moving on so you guys can see what we're doing next. So when it comes to, there are my colors, continuing on with the clouds on this panel when the blue is already down. I usually like to start off with my darkest darks. So I'm going to add in a couple colors. We got, this is dioxazine violet. Thank you, everyone's clapping. I have a really hard time saying that word, dioxazine. It's just a word I struggle with, like cinnamon with some people. I can say cinnamon. Cinnamon's fine, but some people can't say it. For whatever reason, I can. I'm fine. All right, so dioxazine violet. I got my white already on my diox violet. We'll just diox.
Dax, it's fine.
But I'm going to throw in a couple fun colors here. I'm going to actually throw in cadmium yellow light hue. Now, that hue, by the way, that is what tells you that that is a man-made cadmium. It is not a true cadmium, which is why it's in this very affordable set. So I got purple, I got yellow. I'm still going to use the colors that are on my palette already, that burnt sienna, the yellow ochre, the other blues. And I think that's all I'm going to do for right now. I might add in more later, but we got some painting to do. Again, I'm going to get my brush a little wet. Not sopping wet, but just a little wet. And I'm going to also use the satin glazing liquid. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use the acrylic medium in gloss, just because I know this is going to have a bit of a glossy shine to it, so I'm going to use that instead of the other one, because I want this to dry relatively quickly. So, all right. I'm going to get a little bit of that medium and some of that violet. We're just going to call it violet. And titanium white. So we're going to make a nice lavender. Now, the reason why I'm going with lavender, and this is another trick for anybody who is just starting off when it comes to painting objects. Like I said, clouds are not gray. I know this looks gray. It's not gray. The reason why, and this is another little trick for you guys to see, this right here is just a piece of this palette paper with a hole cut in it. The reason why I have a hole cut in it is because I'm going to do this. And actually, let's see how we're gonna show you this a little bit better. There we go, let's zoom in. All right, can we zoom in a little bit more? There we go, yeah, right there. All right, so that portion of the cloud, because we can agree this is gray. That is not gray, that's like a purple. And that's the like shady part of the cloud. Wherever the light is hitting it is gonna be your nice warm tones. And the other side of it, everything that's in shade is gonna be a lot of cool tones, and that's gonna be a lot of purples. So you can use blues, you can use purples, you can even use greens, which is really fun. Which is, you can see a lot of mine right here. That's how I got that little chunk of section there. I didn't use any black in this. I did use the titanium white, same thing here. There's not as dark, but that's my little cloud. And there's still no black. You can use black if you want to, just to darken up your shades if you want to. But I'm going to stick with purple. So I'm going to just kind of place in wherever I think this is gonna be. Now I am not being perfect with it. I'm gonna actually hold my brush at the very back here so I can get it nice and loosey-goosey, because if it doesn't look like the photo, exactly like the photo, it's okay. Again, how would they know? No one's gonna know. So I'm kind of going up and over for that little chunk of shadow.
Can
Question?
I ask why you decided to use a traditionally watercolor brush for this painting, since you're painting in acrylics?
Is the Mimic traditionally for watercolor? I think it can also be used.
Popularly for.
Yeah, it can be used for acrylics too. I really like the feel of the Mimic brush. Again, you don't have to specifically use the Mimic brushes. You can use, you know, your favorite brushes. If you have a golden Taklon brush, that's also really nice. Like the Bestie brushes are really great for this. I just am very familiar with the Mimic brushes, and I really like the way that they work. That's honestly the reason why I grabbed them. Just because they are traditionally a watercolor brush, you don't have to use them for watercolor. They can be used for acrylics. Plus, we're artists, we break the rules. Right?
Just don't use them for watercolor after you use them for acrylic.
Yeah, that's the only thing that you should. Thank you, Katie. If you do use them for acrylics, you cannot be using them for watercolors afterwards. All right, so I'm just real basic shapes of wherever I see that purple shadow. Even down here where I see that light, I'm gonna actually just chunk it in the whole chunk of where I would see that shadow. Eh. All right, a little bit down here. Because that's this bottom part. And I'm going to say that's good for the purple. All right, now I'm going to actually mix in a little bit of this blue. I believe this is the cerulean blue for a real fun, like blue violet-y kind of color. I could use that ultramarine blue that was kind of leaning more towards those purples, but I happen to have this on my palette, and I want to use the paint that I have already. So this is just going to get those just slightly darker areas. So anywhere where I see that, and this is how I typically paint. So I start off with a color, I mix it, I put it everywhere I see it. Just so that way, I mean, I know how I mixed it, but if I see it over here, I'm gonna put it over here. If I see it over here, I'm gonna put it over here. I don't jump back and forth between painting just this one little section of clouds. The reason why is because you want to paint your entire piece as a whole. It's going to give it, especially if you're popping the same colors in all over your canvas, it's going to give it unity, and it's going to make it look like it all kind of works together. Because if you start painting a really beautiful little chunk of cloud over here, and then you leave for the night and go do whatever things that you have to do, make dinner, sleep, all that jazz, and then you come over here and you paint this little cloud the next day, it might not look the same because you might not be using the same colors. You could if you are very, very good at mixing colors, but if you're not and you're a beginner, it might be very difficult for you to do that. Now I'm going to actually start in with this cadmium yellow. Now, a thing to know about the yellow, it's quite strong. It's very strong. Like just a tiny little amount tinted this white quite a lot. So I'm looking for a nice light yellow, but I still want that transparency to it, so I'm going to give a little bit of that, medium, mix it in there, right? And then I'm going to touch in everywhere where I see light. And again, it does not have to be perfect. Now, the reason why I wanted that transparency, and you can see all of my brush strokes, and you can see through that, and that's okay. This isn't the final layer. I'm going to continue to do this and go back and forth between my lights and my darks. And usually I literally go back and forth between lights and darks. So I'll paint my lights, and then I'll go back and paint some more darks, and then I go back and paint some more lights. All of those layers are going to work together, and then eventually it's going to look like a solid mass. So this being the first layer, and the fact that it's really transparent and you can see that background with, through it, it's okay. You're just kind of placing it right now.
While you're finding your light, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Mary wonders, once you thoroughly clean a brush that you used with acrylics, why can't you still use that brush for watercolors?
Because you have the acrylic polymers in your brush, and it just doesn't really work well with your watercolors. I mean, it just doesn't really come back from that. I don't know how to explain it. I'm sure there's a scientific way. Frida, do you have the science?
It's very, very difficult to get all of those polymers out of your brush, no matter how well you clean it.
And that's where, like, these acrylic polymers aren't that awful to, you can wash a brush out really, really well. But yeah, you're going to have minute traces just because those bristles are so absorbent. It's just, it's one of those things. Just like you wouldn't use a brush that you use for oils, you cannot use that for acrylics. That's why, and I was actually just talking about this with Katie, I usually put tape around the end of my brush, and she was like, why don't you just dip it in nail polish? And I was like, that's genius. So that way I know which ones I've used for my oils, because I usually switch back and forth between acrylics and oils. And that's my issue, is knowing which brush I've used for which. And I needed some kind of like a marker system, and that's usually what I do, is a little bit of washi tape usually. But nail polish is my new go-to. Now, the way that I'm painting this on is I'm just using little dabs. I am not brushing very hard onto my canvas, but I'm really not paying attention to the brush mark that I'm doing. I'm just doing little shapes. That's why I'm using the round brush. You can also use this like a flat brush for this too, which is, I love using flat brushes. Or filberts. Filberts are my favorite, because it has a nice roundness to it, but it's also kind of like a flat. All right. Now, if you guys do have any questions while I am fluffing my cloud, feel free to pop them in the chats for our moderators to grab. Now, this section right here, where I was painting that whole chunk of the purple. Because it's acrylics, it's already dried, and now I can layer. This is the cool thing about the acrylics, is that I can put lights on top of darks, and I can also put darks on top of light, which is why I usually start off with my midtones.
Can you use the same brush between watercolor and gouache?
Yes. Now the reason why is because gouache is an opaque watercolor.
Is it all?
No. No, I said gouache. Traditional gouache. Now gouache is one of those words, y'all. If you are not familiar with gouache, please wash. You guys set me up for that, didn't you? Watch the gouache episode. We had an episode where I ordered everything on our website that had the word gouache in it. Now, a traditional gouache is an opaque watercolor. That means it is literally a watercolor that has an opacity to it, but it still re-wets, and it's still pigment with a standard watercolor binder, which is usually like a gum arabic, something like that. Not everything labeled gouache is actually that. Some, I don't know why, but some manufacturers just use it as a catch-all word. So there's a lot of like acryl gouache, or acryla gouache, or acrylic gouache, or there's another one that actually is labeled as a gouache, but it's actually an acrylic. There's a lot of them that it kind of tiptoes the line between acrylic and gouache. But there's a lot of them that have that acrylic polymer as a binder, and you just need to, I guess, kind of know which one's which. Usually they're either labeled, or you can find that information on our website, or watch the gouache episode. That is very hard to say. Anybody out there want to say watch the gouache episode? Feel the pain. You guys know I struggle with words already. All right, so far we're looking pretty cloudy, with a chance of meatballs. I'm sorry. Anybody with a kid knows. Anybody does. Or with a love of animated movies, also acceptable. But this is essentially the process I'm going to go through over and over and over again. So I'm going to continue to just dab on a little bit of color wherever I see it. Now, I've used yellows in my light area, and I've used purples in my dark area. Another thing that you can do, because this, burnt sienna has a little bit of that like reddish orange to it, I'm going to also use that in my light areas. Or actually, I can use it as a transition area between my shadows and my lights. But I do need a little bit of titanium white. Excuse my reach. There we go. I'm just going to keep my titanium white over here. Just because when you are painting clouds, you are going to kind of use a lot of titanium white. I use a lot of different tints and stuff. Or tints and, I don't want to say shades because that's when you mix it in with black. But a lot of tints. So just that little bit of burnt sienna. And I mix that into my cadmium yellow light with my titanium white. I just mixed in a little bit of that burnt sienna into the same exact mixture, and I haven't cleaned my brush. It's just one of those things where you can keep working off the same pile and just use a couple different colors just to tint it and shift your color ever so slightly. But this will give me a nice fun little variety of areas in those light sections of my clouds. So they still appear light, and especially when I kind of go over them half on the purple and half on the white area, because it is got that, or it does have that medium mix into it, it's gonna have that transparency, so they optically mix. So on the yellow section, it still looks nice and bright, but on the purple section, it looks a little bit more like it's transitioning into shadow. So that's how I actually get those blends. I don't actually blend my acrylics. I just layer them. You don't actually have to sit there with another brush and try to get it perfectly transitioned. You can just layer. So, probably need to mix a little bit more of that. Now, when it comes to these little fluffy chunks up here, if you're feeling bold, paint them. If this gives you like super anxiety and you're not quite sure how to approach that, you can always edit it out. You don't have to have those things for a beautiful painting. No one's gonna know. But if you want to try it out, let me actually clean off my brush, because I actually really love that color for that little chunk of area on my brush, or on my my clouds. Because remember, that's the color that I have down here. So if I pop that real funky, like, what was that? The sky blue mixed in with the yellow ochre and titanium white. If I pop that in up here, it's gonna tie those sections of my canvas together. And how are we doing on time, by the way?
You can go for just a little, we're right about the time, but if you want to go just a few minutes longer.
Okay.
I want them to see a good chunk of a cloud, considering they hung out with us for a little bit longer.
Yes. And actually, I'm gonna skip that then, just because that's gonna take a lot of time. But it's the same exact process, where I would get this color and I would mix it in with my medium, and I would just lightly fluff it up. That's the term. I would do the same kind of little floofy kind of mark making technique, and if I wanted to, and I wanted to have a really soft edge, especially down on the bottom here, that's where I would take another brush. I wouldn't have anything on it, and I would just really lightly go into it just to kind of transition that color. But what I am gonna do, so you guys can really see a good chunk of cloud, because you guys are amazing and stuck with us through all of our technical difficulties. I want to show you when it comes to pure white on a cloud. So I have that on my brush already, but I'm gonna just pull this up closer. When it comes to, and I have a chunk of paint on there, sorry. When it comes to pure white on a cloud, there are not that many sections of a cloud that are pure white. I can see some up here, some up here, there's a little bit in here, and this one's really in a lot of light, so that's where I would touch my whites into my painting. Now, the beautiful thing about being an artist is that you have the ability to edit. Like I was just saying, wherever you touch white into your painting, you are now controlling where someone is looking at the artwork. Their eye is going to go straight into the white sections of your fluffy white cloud. The reason why is just because that's how our eyes typically just work. And it is really cool to be able to control where someone looks in a painting. So this is where I would do just a little bit around here. So I don't see a whole lot of pure white right here, but I am going to touch a little pure white right here, because what I want to have happen is I want your eye to follow that little area. But here's the trick with pure white. You can overdo it. You can very much overdo it. So you got to be kind of selective on where you put it. Now, if you do get to a point in your painting where you realize you put way too much there, you can absolutely, especially with acrylics, paint on top of it. With oils, you can tint the colors back down pretty easily, which is really, really awesome. And you can kind of tone those whites down again. It's a little bit harder to do that with oils because you typically want to go from dark to light. Acrylics, you have that ability to kind of pop back and forth between them. But it can be done with oils. So is everybody still nice and following along on the instructions on how to paint a nice fluffy white cloud?
Would you ever use zinc white to lower the impact level of the titanium white?
Absolutely. Remember, your colors are also just like tools. If it's going to be better that you use a more transparent white to get it to do exactly what you want, please experiment with it. That's all art really is. It's experimenting and kind of having fun and seeing what works and seeing what you like. And if you end up doing a bunch of tiny little clouds, you'll realize that your paintings get more and more kind of further along in the way that you want it to look. Because I did this one first and I did this one second, and I love this one far more than I love that one. The reason why is because I was just much happier with my color mixing here. I remembered to push my values further, and it's just one of those things that the more you do it, the better you're gonna get. And it might not look perfect the first time, and that's okay. You can absolutely have a painting that you don't like, and you can paint over it, and you can paint something else on top of it. And that's kind of the beauty of doing art and being creative, is that it allows you to have those explorations of what you're doing and figuring out what works and what doesn't. The one thing this shouldn't be doing is giving you crazy anxiety and like worrying you on whether or not it's going to look good. If it doesn't look good, that's okay. All right, so I think that's it for the whites. How do we feel about our clouds? Are we happy, ladies? Now, again, this isn't fully painted to where the level of what I would paint it to if I were just left to my own devices, but I know we are probably running out of time. That was a whole lot of painting, and it was so much fun. I hope you guys get a chance to explore painting fluffy clouds, and if you guys did get a chance to actually paint along with me, or if you do this exercise later on and you have a chance to actually try it out, I really hope you guys end up posting that and letting me see your work, because I would love to see what you create. You can put it in our Facebook group, which is the Jerry's Live Facebook group, I believe is the title. You'll see my face and this whole lovely teal background, which looks like a nice fluffy cloud, by the way. I'm in the clouds. But you can put it there, or if you're not brave enough, that is also okay. You can send it to me personally if you want to just share it with one person. You can always find me on my Facebook page, which is Emmy, host of Jerry's Live, or you can find me on Instagram, which is misscakes.art. You can find me there. But that was painting fluffy clouds. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I always go through and make sure to answer them, so even if I didn't get to them during the show, I will always make sure to check back. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and join us next week because we are going to continue all the things canvas, and we're going to be going over those canvas panels and mounting. So that was everything. Thank you guys. Bye.